Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Did you have a good afternoon today? Hasn't this summit been incredible? This has just been incredible. And I would like for you to help us with housekeeping. And if you have not taken one of the tent cards prepared by Teresa Powell at DSHS on the definitions of equity, diversity, inclusion, go ahead and just take that now off your table. And the norm cards prepared from the tips from Dr. Caprice Holland, just go ahead and take that with you as well, so that you can begin to share that information with the people. Now, I do have a pair of glasses up here that are not mine, so if they're yours, please see me at the end of today. And I invite you, before we introduce our closing powerful keynote speaker, to just stand with me and let's just give a big round of applause for Brent back there on the mic, Todd back there, and Wayne on the camera. Let's give it up for the sound guys. They're just keeping everything just moving smoothly for us. Also, you'll notice that you do not have evaluations in your programs. I misspoke the other day. Instead, we have upped our game, and we will be sending those to you by email. We do encourage you to take a minute or two and complete them and give us some input and feedback. And by the way, just know, if you enjoyed these 2 days, then let's just give it up one more time for the Summit Planning Committee members. Just go ahead and stand for me. They worked tirelessly. Marika Bardo, our co-chair, with Patty Danner, Ayanna Coleman, Jessica Zinda, Mark Adrian, Rocky D'Amico, Ruby R., Tabby Petrie, and Teresa Powell. They just did an outstanding job. I realize the only thing standing between you and getting on the road is me and Tim Wise. So I'm getting out of the way. I'm getting out of the way now. Those are pretty much most of the closing remarks that I wanted to make sure you all heard before you left. And I just want us to sit back, buckle our seatbelts, prepare our hearts and minds for the next phase of our life-transforming journey in this new decade, in this new era, where ain't no stopping us now. How many of you have heard of Tim Wise? Has anybody here heard of Tim Wise? I'm going to take a personal point of privilege. Jared Irvin on my team, we were having a conversation one day, and he said, Dr. J, I want to share with you a book that I read that has really impacted my life. So being the wonderful boss that I am, I said, well, which book? And he said, White Like Me by Tim Wise. And he talked about how important it is for our team, those entrusted to my care, to be familiar with his work. And I said, okay, buy the book. We'll give it to our team. And so you can only imagine how delighted we are when we invited him to join us, because he's too busy being named a visionary who's changing the world by Utley Reader, his own podcast, Speak Out with Tim Wise, traveling internationally in Canada and Bermuda and training corporations and entertainment and people in media and law and all of that, and for methods in dismantling racism in institutions. And then in his free time, he's off writing books like his latest one, Under the Influence, shaming the poor, praising the rich, and sacrificing the future of America. And then, in the midst of all of that, he's being featured in documentaries, including the 2013 Media Education Foundation release, White Like Me, Race, Racism, and White Privilege in America. I would encourage you to look at that. Then, on top of all of that, he's appearing alongside legendary scholars and activists like Angela Davis in a 2011 documentary entitled Vocabulary of Change. And I really would encourage you to find that one, because in that one, it was a public dialogue between two activists, Tim Wise and Angela Davis. And they discussed the connection between issues of race, class, gender, sexuality, and militarism, as well as intergenerational movement building, and the prospects for social change. A lot of what we're doing here in this state. You might have seen him because he does appear regularly on CNN and MSNBC to discuss race issues, and he was featured in a 2007 segment on 2020. I could go on. I'm not. His bio is on page 17. At this point, I'm going to ask you to do what we do here in Washington. We're going to stand on our feet, and we are going to give a great, big, huge welcome and thank you up front to Tim Wise from traveling all the way from Nashville to join us.
Thank you. So I know there is pretty considerable echo in the room. Can everybody hear me all right in the back? Are we good? Yeah? Okay. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you sticking around till the end. I hear that you've gotten a lot of great learning out of this event, and it's always good when you're the final speaker and half the room is not cleared out of anger, consternation, or fear about what is to come. I was the closing speaker at a conference a couple days ago, and there was it was the 3-day weekend though, and it was like on a Friday, so people were heading for the exits. I was like, I haven't said anything yet. I haven't pissed anyone off yet, and they're leaving. And here you all are, because it's midweek. What the hell are you gonna do? Like, you might as well stay here with me. I want to thank the organizers of the event, and particularly because I was given very little instruction, which is awesome and dangerous. Awesome because it suggests that finally at the age of 51 I am trusted enough by those who put these events together to believe that I'll be able to come up with something, valuable. So they don't have to micromanage my talk. They don't have to check in with me 15 times and say this, don't say this, say this, don't say this. So I'm finally, I'm a big boy now. I'm an adult now, which is awesome after 25 years of this to finally be trusted. And it's dangerous though, because when you don't tell me what you want, I told them last night at dinner, like, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna check Twitter. And then whatever my mood is by 3:30 is what y'all gonna get. So it's a crapshoot, you just don't know for real what's gonna happen. I'm actually in a pretty good place though, so it'll be all right. I'm in a pretty good place. Also, as the final speaker, I know that there's a particular kind of thing that conference organizers and event organizers do look for in a closing keynote. I know you're not so much looking for a closer to come in and provide all of this sort of content of heavy knowledge and facts and information, because that's what you've been doing now for the last 2 days. You got a lot of that. You got a lot of that analysis. You got a lot of that information that you can use practically when you go back to your jobs and do DEI work. So you've sort of got that covered. I think the closer's job is to send you off with some level of inspiration, I assume, and I presume. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today. I'm going to try to give you a couple of nuggets of information that you can walk away with, and hopefully these will help you in the DEI work that you do and help you do that work better. They are important sort of foundational ideas that I think sometimes get overlooked but are very critical. The first of which is that if you are going to do DEI work in any way, shape, or form, if you were going to work on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the first order of business, and it is regularly ignored, is you have to ask yourself, why in the hell is it that we don't already have equity and inclusion now? Why is it that in spite of being good people with good intentions, intelligent folks capable of doing all kinds of things, that we still struggle year after year and decade after decade, so much so that we keep having these events? The hell's wrong with us? Us. What's wrong with us as a culture, as a people, that we're still having the conversation today that we were having when I started this work a quarter century ago, and when others started it a quarter century before that, and when others started it hundreds of years before that? How in the hell can so many bright, capable, well-intended people fail? And I say that and I ask that with all sincerity and in love, because I'm suggesting to you there must be a reason why we haven't gotten there. See, the diversity piece is easy. The D is done. We've been diverse as a society ever since white folks stepped on the shores of North America and added some whiteness to a place that already had plenty of color. So we've always had diversity. The diversity piece is easy, see? We've always had it. It's the E and the I that we stumble upon. It's that where we find ourselves coming up short. Why? If you don't ask that question, you can never figure out the answer on how you're going to get there. And see, one of the reasons that we don't get there is because we haven't really explored the roots of our dilemma. We haven't really been honest about the place that brought us from point A to point B. And if you're not clear on where you come from, you have no idea how you got where you are, and you certainly don't know where you're going tomorrow. And so what I want to suggest to you is that we need a far better sociological imagination. See, sociologists will teach you these dynamics. A sociological imagination is the kind of imagination that allows you to ask, how the hell is this happening? But they don't teach us that in K-12, and unless you sign up for sociology in college, you'll never be taught that either. And I don't think about this just as a scholar, as an academic, as an activist, as a writer. I think about it as a dad. Because when you have children, you're always noticing how they come to understand stuff or not, right? And it's the same process for everyone, whether it happens when you're a little kid or a little older, right? I happen to be the father of 2 teenage girls, so if y'all are people who pray, you can send one up for my wife and I anytime today. It'll be appreciated. I'm pretty militantly agnostic, but I'll take your prayers anyway. Because being agnostic, I just don't know, right? Like, I don't know. I just do it. I don't know. Like, take a shot, you know? 18 and 16, so pray twice, you know? And several years ago, when they were 10 and 12, I really came to appreciate the importance of understanding what came before so you can understand what's going on now. Because again, as a parent, I'm noticing some things. So one day we're driving from their school to the dance studio where they're both dancers, and they were both in a dance company in downtown Nashville at the time. And it's a drive that we make every day. We've been making it every day at that point for like a year and a half, or at least 4 or 5 days a week, right? It's about an 8-minute drive from their school to the studio on surface roads. Don't even have to get on the interstate, just surface streets all the way. And we're driving the same route that we drive every day we do it. But one day, this day, we get stopped at an intersection, a red light, and it happens to be in the middle of public housing, just down the street from their school, halfway between the school and the studio, about 4 minutes away from the school. And as we're waiting for the light to change from red to green, the 10-year-old in the back seat, whose name is Rachel, she looks around, and I'm sure that on other occasions she had noticed the racial composition of the neighborhood, but it was only on that day that she opted to ask anything about it, and she did. She said, "Daddy, why is this neighborhood pretty much all black?" And I thought, well, now that is one hell of a good question. I mean, I was excited. My 10-year-old is doing urban anthropology in the back of my Highlander, y'all. That is some pretty good shit for a 10-year-old. That's sociological imagination, and she's 10. I'm like, let's do this early admission college thing, get that out the way right now. You're already ahead, you know? And I was also excited, let's be honest. The reason I was really excited was it's like the one question that my kid could ask that I actually know the damn answer to. And when you are a parent, you will take your victories wherever the hell you can find them. You don't find them often, but when you find them, you will take them. So it's because like if she'd asked me anything else, y'all, you don't understand how limited my knowledge range is. If she had asked me anything else, I would have been lost. She could have said, "Daddy, where does electricity come from?" I'd have been like, "Psh, you got a phone, look it up." Didn't they cover that in science class? What's wrong with your teachers? Or I would have done that thing that all parents do. It's a universal sign, parents. You know it. I'm about to expose this to those who don't know, so sorry to blow up your spot, but here's the thing. This is something universally parents do when we don't know the answer to something that our kids ask. Here's what we say. Here's what we say. Watch this. Here's what we say. We say, "I don't know. What do you think?" Which is our way of saying, don't have a clue, but maybe you do and we can learn together. That's what that is. But this is the one question that I actually know the answer to, y'all. She's asking me about the racial composition of a neighborhood. Daddy's got that. Daddy's actually studied that. That's what Daddy knows, so I was excited because now I get to show off how smart I am to my children. Right? Now I know, I ain't gonna be able to do a lot. I got 4 minutes left before we're gonna be at the studio, so I can't do like the PhD level version of this thing. Number one, because I don't have a PhD, so there's that. Number two, we only got 4 minutes, not a lot of time. And number three, they're 10 and 12, so they can't handle the PhD level version. But I had the elevator speech version of how this shit came to be, right? How this neighborhood got to be almost all black and these neighborhoods over here got to be almost all white. I got that. So I'm ready with the 4-minute version, and then something happened. I didn't know it was gonna happen because I'm an only child. But apparently I've learned since that day that when a younger sibling asks a question of a parent in the presence of an older sibling, the older sibling will inevitably and without much delay just answer the damn question themselves, just to show off how much smarter than their younger sibling they happen to be. So remember the question. Rachel says, "Daddy, why is this neighborhood pretty much all black?" I want to understand, why are these things the way they are? Why is this neighborhood pretty much all black? The 12-year-old, whose name is Ashton, jumps in and says, "Redlining." I was like, what? What the hell was that? Like, do you just know things? Like, what? Did your mother give birth to a sociological savant? What the hell is that? And the 10-year-old said, "Daddy, I don't know what redlining is." I'm like, your sister doesn't know what redlining is. She just came up with that. It's amazing. Actually, gotta be honest, she's not right. She's wrong. I'm gonna give her half credit though, because she's 12. Redlining isn't really how the neighborhood got to be black. It is how the neighborhood got and stayed poor. Right, so for those of you who don't know the term, redlining was the practice that banks engaged in openly, legally, until the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, and they still do it indirectly. But it used to be common and perfectly legal for them to do. They would just draw, red lines around black neighborhoods on maps in the bank office, and anybody who lived within the contours of the boundary was not going to get a loan. It didn't matter what your credit was, right? Didn't matter if you had a good job, didn't matter if you had an education, didn't matter. you weren't going to get a loan. And so that's how neighborhoods like the one we were in became undercapitalized, became stripped of capital and investment. So it's not how the neighborhood came to be black, but it is how it came to be poor. And she's 12, y'all, so I'm gonna give her 50% credit, and we're just gonna do a retest after like the next 4 minutes, because I'm feeling pretty good about her in that moment, right? But I knew I had to explain, yeah, the redlining thing's good. Let me give you the 4 minutes that you need. And so I started to explain this to them. And I said, first of all, you need to understand that this place that we're in right now, this public housing community that we're driving through, these were not created for black and brown folks. They were created for white folks. They were built in the 1930s, starting in the 1930s, specifically for white, lower income, working class, and poor people to be able to have a piece of, quote unquote, the American dream going forward into the middle of the 20th century. In fact, people of color were blocked from public housing for the first several years of its existence. So it wasn't created for the people who you see disproportionately here now. It was created for people like us, but then the government did something else as well. It created the FHA loan program, later the VA loan program, later the GI Bill. In theory, these were open to all, or at least returning veterans, or in the case of the FHA, anyone who could qualify for one of these low-interest loans. But in practice, people of color were routinely excluded from them. About 97% of all the benefits for the first 30 years of this government effort went to white families who received $120 billion worth of housing equity preferentially because of a government policy. Right? These are the same people who say they never got anything from government, they built everything on their own, they came from nothing, rags to riches, never had anybody help them. Lies, all of it. These institutions were created for us, and then white folks were subsidized to leave the cities, to flee the cities, and to move to the suburbs where only we could live, right? And that's how the neighborhood became black. Because white folks who originally were subsidized there in public housing then were subsidized to leave there and to go to the outer areas where, again, only we were being allowed to live. Now, I'm giving them this sort of thumbnail sketch. I get to the studio, I drop them off. I'm feeling pretty good about myself, having boiled down America's racial history of the past century or so into about a 4-minute thing. I drop them off. I ask them as they get out of the car, does that make sense to you? Is that clear? They seemed appropriately horrified, so I felt like I had done my job. Right. But as I pulled away, see, I had this fear come over me. This recognition, this terror, right? And the terror was the result of realizing something, and that is, what happens if I don't know the answer to that question? And how many parents wouldn't know the answer to that question, especially white parents? See, black and brown folks sort of know that history because they lived it, right? So they don't need anybody to teach it to them. They don't have to read a book on it. They just got to talk to grandma. They just got to talk to mom. They just got to talk to the uncle or the auntie or whoever, because they lived through the experience. But for those of us who were white, we don't have to know any of that. It's not on the test. And by that, I mean whatever test you got to take to get to college, to get to grad school, law school, med school, get a license in any professional field of endeavor that you might choose. You don't ever have to know that you show that you know anything about the experiences of millions of your fellow countrymen and women, and yet they have to know everything about your stuff. Right? And so as I pulled away, I realized, what if a child asks their white parent that question and the white parent doesn't know the history? What happens? Do you think the child stops being curious? No, we're very curious as a species, aren't we? Not only children, we all are. When we see stuff that we can't quite explain, we tend to want to know how it got to be that way. The problem is, if you don't have that history that I just offered, if you don't know how we got this unequal, how we got this profoundly separated from one another, how we got this divided on the basis of race and class, you will fill in the blanks with your own answers. And you know what those answers are going to be, because they're the only ones this culture has given you. They are the inevitable default position of this society. What's the one thing that every one of us in this room, irrespective of race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, geographic region of origin, religion, or any other indicator, what's the one thing we've all been taught? If you were born and reared in this country, or if you've been here for more than a minute, the one thing we were all taught is this: in America, by God, anybody can make it if they try. Right? If you didn't make it, it's your own fault. If you did, it's because you worked hard. If you didn't, you ought to work harder, because by God, in America, anyone can be anything they want if they just put their mind to it. The myth of rugged individualism and meritocracy, that is the cornerstone of our foundational ideology. It is Genesis 1:1 in the Bible of Americanism. It is the secular gospel of the country, but here's the problem. Number one, we all know it isn't true. We don't want to admit that it isn't true, but we all know deep down it is. We all know there are people, maybe in our own families, who have worked hard their whole lives, got nothing to show for it. And then we know people who were born on third base, think they hit a triple, never had to work hard a day in their lives. I'm even told there are some persons, I will leave it to your imagination and the magic of Google to figure out who it might be, but I'm told there are some persons who over the course of their 71 or so years on this planet inherited or received approximately $400 million worth of real estate assets and cash from their daddy and still want you to think that they're a self-made billionaire. You see, so we all know it's not that simple, is it? It's not just about you get out what you put in. We all know it's not that easy, right? But if you're taught that, and we're all taught that, and then you look around and you see profound inequality, you see rich here and poor here, what happens? You rationalize these folks' poverty and you rationalize these folks' wealth, because if, after all, anybody can make it, quote unquote, then why the hell didn't these people? Must be because they're inferior, must be that they've got a bad work ethic, must be they didn't want it as hard. Imagine that ideology still existing in a society where we've just come out of an economic collapse caused not by the poor, I beg to remind you, but by the illegal and unethical machinations of some of the richest, smartest, most highly educated bankers on the planet. They all had high SAT scores. They all had good MCAT scores. They went to business schools. They're the rich and powerful, and they destroyed the economy. They either ripped off or lost 20% of the accumulated wealth of this country that it took 230-something years to accumulate. They wiped it out in 18 months, y'all. That wasn't black and brown people, and it wasn't poor people of any color. It was just rich, white, overwhelmingly men, but they still got their bonuses and nobody went to jail. We don't live in a meritocracy. But if I tell you that we do, if I tell you that anybody can make it, and then we see massive racial disparity, we see white disproportionately here, not exclusively, but disproportionately, and we see black and brown disproportionately down here, not exclusively, but disproportionately, then we rationalize racial inequity too, right? We say, well, I guess these folks are either genetically or culturally defective in some way, and then we rationalize the inequities, which means we don't solve them, which means you can't get the E and the I unless you interrogate the fundamental ideology of the culture in which you exist. If you don't do that, you'll never get the E and I, because you'll keep rationalizing the inequality and the exclusion. You see? Same thing with gender disparity. If you have men disproportionately on top of the hierarchies and women disproportionately not on top of the hierarchies, on the bottom of them, you will then rationalize gender disparity as well, right? All of these inequities become easy to rationalize away. Easy to explain away if we don't interrogate our fundamental ideology as a country. And I know it's hard to do. It's like going to church on a Sunday, sitting in the second row of pews, and after the sermon standing up and telling the minister that you do not believe there is a God. It doesn't go over well. And standing up in this country and saying that perhaps our founding mythology is just that, a myth, that it is far more complicated and always had been, that goes over like a proverbial lead balloon. But I'm here to tell you, if we don't embrace that truth, we can never get to equity and inclusion, because we will constantly rationalize that those on the bottom are there because they deserve to be there, and those on the top are there because they deserve to be there, and neither of those things are true. The second important point to leave you with, if you're going to get to equity and inclusion, you have to understand that inequity and exclusion is not an accident. It didn't just happen. See, sometimes I think that we think systems are breaking down and failing. So you'll sometimes hear that, right, when we have inequality. Let's say our schools, year after year don't produce greater equity, and our job market doesn't seem to produce greater equity. And so even when the economy is doing relatively well, there's still a big disparity between black and brown and white, right? Even when the schools are doing a little better, there's still massive racial disparities, et cetera, right? And so people will look at that and they'll say, why is the system failing? See, that's the problem. If you think the system is failing, you're not paying attention. I remember many years ago, I lived in New Orleans for 10 years. I went to college there, and I lived there for 6 years after I graduated. And I was long gone by Katrina, but when Katrina came in 2005, y'all remember, there was a really good documentary that Spike Lee put together called When the Levees Broke. Really good documentary, but there's one thing that Spike said in that film that I took issue with, and I've always agreed with Spike's analysis on most everything, but this one line got to me. Because it's a line where he says, what happened with Hurricane Katrina in this city was a system failure of monumental proportions. And I remember thinking, I don't know about that. Because how can it be a system failure? See, if it's a failure, you would have to believe that until Katrina made landfall, things had been working out pretty splendidly for poor black folk in the city of New Orleans. And if you believe that shit, you have not been paying attention to the lives of black folk in the city of New Orleans, right? Unless the system was working for them, what happened when Katrina came in can't be seen as a failure, right? If a system was never set up for you in the first place, and then it proceeds to let you down, that is not the system failing, that is the system operating exactly as it was intended to operate. So inequality and exclusion was baked into this system, particularly our schools. I mean, that's where it begins. Go back and look at what some of our leading educational thinkers in history have told us. They've admitted that it was deliberate. It's not an accident, right? If this were like an app on your phone, y'all, this is not a glitch, it's a feature. You understand? Like, they're not sending a patch. There's no update tonight that is gonna, oh, it fixed it. No, it's built into the app. Go back and look what Thomas Jefferson, who at the time that he wrote Notes on the State of Virginia, he wasn't only an aspiring founding father, right? He was also an educational philosopher. He was the founder of the University of Virginia, very well-respected thinker in the field of schooling. What did Jefferson say about schooling? He said, what we need is like 6 years, I think is what he said, 6 years of compulsory schooling. Now, he was just talking about for white folks, right? He didn't mean that for black folks or native peoples, right? It was indigenous folk, black folk weren't getting any education as far as he was concerned. But the white folks would get 6 years, because I guess in like the 1780s that was impressive. I don't know, right? And so Jefferson says we need 6 years of compulsory education. Why? So that we can, quote, rake a few geniuses from the rubbish. His words, not mine. Rake a few geniuses from the rubbish. The operative assumption being most of y'all are trash. But if we give 6 years of education, we can figure out the handful of people that are smart enough to run this thing, and the rest of y'all gonna work for us, right? So what was he saying? He was saying education is not, as some like to proclaim it, the great equalizer. It's not that, and it was not meant to be that. Thomas Jefferson was saying it's an unequalizer, y'all. That's why we do this thing. So we can actually embed inequality. Not by accident, not a system failure, system design. Fast forward, Woodrow Wilson, before he became president of the United States, he was president of Princeton, and he too was a well-regarded educational theorist in his day, very much like Jefferson had been in his. And what did Wilson say about schooling? He said this, sort of similar to Jefferson. He said, what we need is one group of people to prepare themselves for the receipt of a liberal education. That being the term they used to use for college. So it doesn't mean liberal in the political sense, right? It just means that's what they called college ed. We need one group to prepare themselves for the receipt of a liberal education, and another group, he said, much larger by necessity in this and every other society, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and prepare themselves for the performance of certain difficult manual tasks. So what was Woodrow Wilson saying the point of school was? Same as what Jefferson was saying. He was saying, look, most of y'all are going to do some heavy lifting. There's a handful of us that are too smart and too precious to do the heavy lifting, so we're going to run stuff, and the rest of y'all are going to pick things up for us. In other words, the point of school was, again, inequality. Now, some might say I'm being cynical if I contend that that is still the case. Some might say, well, yes, but Tim, come on, that's like the turn of the 20th century. Surely we've moved beyond that. Okay, let's check it out. 2001, after No Child Left Behind becomes the law of the land under the Bush administration, I remember I was watching one of those Sunday talk shows, right? And they were talking to William Bennett, former Secretary of Education, and until recently, the worst one we'd ever had. But you know, I mean, records are made to be broken, y'all. And every now and then shit happens. And, but Bennett is still, holding tight at number 2. Let's just be honest. Like, it'd be a jump ball, but I think he might lose now. I don't know. Anyway, he's on TV, and they're asking him about No Child Left Behind because it's just become the law, right? And the host asked Bill Bennett, what do you think the biggest problem in American education today is? And I thought, man, that's a heavy question. Like, if you ask me that question, I might ask for a couple minutes to think about it, because I might ask to go to a commercial break or something. Like, that's a big one, right? He didn't need a commercial break, man. Bill Bennett was ready. He was on it, right? What's the biggest problem with American education? William Bennett, former Secretary of Education, answers without hesitation. He says, too many people are going to college. And I remember thinking, like, I was in a good mood that morning. I was in a real ecumenical mood. I was almost about to give Bill Bennett the benefit of the doubt on something. Like, I was thinking, there's no way he meant to end that sentence with a period. Like, there's got to be more. There's got to be more coming. You know how sometimes you'll be talking to a friend and, like, your throat will catch and you got some phlegm or something, and you just have to, like, get a little water or something, right? Or clear your throat. And you know how that happens, and you got more to say, but it just gets caught. So I was going to give him a second. Like, I thought maybe he had more to say. Maybe what he wanted to say was, too many people are going to college, ... who can't afford it because it's too expensive. All right, I'll take that answer, right? Or maybe he meant to say, there are too many people going to college, ... who aren't adequately prepared because we haven't fully resourced and funded our K-12 schools. I'll accept that answer as well. No, there's no ... There's no internal ellipses, no comma, no M dash, no semicolon, no nothing. Just a period at the end of the sentence. He meant what he said, and he said what he meant. Too many people are going to college. Now, who is he talking about? I mean, he doesn't have to say it, does he? We know who he's not talking about. He's not talking about the rich and mediocre children of rich and mediocre parents who got their rich and mediocre children into prep school even though they were rich and mediocre, and then got them into college on the back of their mediocrity, where they proceeded to get C's at Yale University, but went on to become president and then went back to Yale and bragged about being a C student. We're not talking about that guy, right? We're not talking about the guy that went to Fordham and then was able to transfer into Penn because an admissions officer felt sorry for his brother and his family, and daddy wrote a check and was able to get him in there as well. We're not talking about the rich and mediocre. The rich and mediocre are never presumed out of place, no matter where they are, right? So when Bill Bennett says there are too many people going to college, he's not talking about them. We don't go to prep schools up and down the East Coast and ask the kids there that are getting the lower grades, like, I know you think you want to go to med school and business school and be a lawyer and stuff, but have you ever thought about maybe working at a fast food joint, like, forever? Like, have you ever thought about that? Because, that seems to comport better with your grades. We would never say that to somebody at a prep school because we know they're going to run the universe. When he says too many people are going to college. We know who he means. He means working class people of all colors. He means people of color specifically, of all classes, people that are going to college in greater numbers today than in prior generations. What he is voicing is the mentality of the slave owner. Because that mentality said what? If they all learn how to read, who is going to pick this cotton? And in the modern era, if they all go to college, see who's going to pick up my garbage on Wednesdays and haul it away to the county dump. And who's going to change the bedpans at the hospitals, and who's going to change the sheets in the hotels I stay in, see? Because if they all go to college, they'll think they're too good for that work. How do I know? Because I went to college and they told me I was. Right? So inequality is by design. It's not an accident. And this is not conspiratorial. This is not some conspiracy theory here. This is what sociologists call functionalism. Right? The idea that systems that are in place stay in place because they work for the people with the most power. If they stop working for the people with the most power, that shit will get changed, right? And when it doesn't get changed, you can bet that it's because it's working for the people who count. That's why we continue to give standardized tests to unstandardized children from unstandardized schools, unstandardized neighborhoods, unstandardized teacher training, unstandardized curriculum. Because it works really well for those on the top of the hierarchy. The most highly correlated factor with test scores is your zip code. So it's going to remain in place, even though everybody that's being honest knows these tests don't indicate actual intelligence, ability, decency, compassion, character, or anything else, but we keep them in place because they are functional for the people with the most power. If you don't understand how inequality is deliberate, you'll never be able to get to equality because you'll be spinning your wheels constantly, trying to figure out how do we just patch up the system a little bit? How do we plug this hole here? And how do we plug this hole here? Maybe we just need a little more money for training. Maybe we just need a little more money for this. No, you have to retool the machinery. If you're standing at the end of a conveyor belt at a sausage factory, do not be surprised when it gives you sausage. If you're standing at the end of a conveyor belt in a sausage factory and you're sitting there like, where, oh, where are my chicken nuggets? It is obvious that you did not read the sign. It is a sausage factory. Sausage is what it does. Expect sausage. Right? We live in a society that operates very much like that factory. It gives you exactly what it was programmed to give you. If you don't like the outcome, you change the system. Final thought. And this is going to sound really odd, but I promise it makes sense. If you want to get to equity and inclusion, you have to relinquish hope. Now that is going to sound awfully odd. Relinquish hope, my God, what do you mean relinquish hope? We have to maintain hope. Sometimes hope is all we have. Here's what I mean when I say relinquish hope. What is hope? So here's the deal, y'all. I'm going to get on a plane tonight, and I'm going to fly to Orange County. And then tomorrow night, or the next day, Friday, I'm going to get on another plane. I'm going to fly home to Nashville, where I live. I do not know how to fly a plane. I don't even know how planes work. Like I said, my area of expertise, very limited, right? I didn't pay attention in science class. I don't understand aviation. I think it might be witchcraft. Like, I think it's magic. I don't think it actually happens. I don't know what it is. I don't. But I hope that the plane doesn't crash. And when I get on that plane tonight, I will hope that it does not crash. But here's the deal. Like, if we hit really bad turbulence and shit starts to peel off the plane, all I got is hope because I cannot land it, right? So hope is fine. But see, the problem with it is it's of limited use because it gives away your agency. When I hope that that plane doesn't go down, that's just an empty thing. I have no control over it. If it starts to, we're going to die. And every time I tell this story, I know it's always like people, like, what if it does happen? Then y'all are going to be on YouTube like, he totally foresaw his own death. No, I've been telling this story for a minute. Like, I think the plane's going to be fine, y'all. I'm just saying, like, if it's not, it's not. Like, I can do nothing but hope. Right? I have no control over that. Same thing like when my girls go out in the car, right? So now they're both driving and they're both really good drivers. They're very careful. because we have a GPS app that tracks their ass, so they have to be. So we know, like, if they go fast, we know. If they brake too hard, we know. Like, it's totally Big Brother, but oh so necessary. And when they go out driving, I hope that they come home safe. They go to a party, they go out with friends, they go out to eat, they could drive to dance, now they drive themselves, and come back. I hope that they come back in one piece, and I hope that they don't get a ticket, and I hope they don't get in an accident. But again, hope is all I've got. I have no control over that, no agency whatsoever. The problem is when you do your social justice or DEI work or inclusion and equity and justice work of any kind on the basis of hope, it's like the way I'm relating to my children in that car, the way I'm relating to that plane. It's just empty. You're giving away your agency. Hope is something you have when you have no control, but this is something that you can control. This is something over which you do have agency. So I'm saying relinquish hope and replace it with commitment. Replace it with a commitment to doing the work day in and day out, and remembering that no matter how difficult it is, because I know that's the thing, right? We get discouraged, things get bad, and then they get worse sometimes. They don't just get better all the time. And sometimes those of us who do this kind of work find ourselves constantly wondering if and when justice is ever going to come, so it can be incredibly dispiriting. But I want you to remember what those who have been in this fight have always known. And that is that the measure of our humanity is found in the commitment that you make to changing this culture and changing the society in which you live. If you haven't had the chance to go to Washington, D.C. and walk the halls of the African American History and Culture Museum, you need to do it. And if you've already done it, go back and do it again. And you'll understand what I'm talking about. It's an incredibly powerful experience, right? Emmett Till's original casket is there. Nat Turner's Bible is there. There's a slave auction block there. Right? There's a statue of Thomas Jefferson there, and it's cloaked in shadows, and behind him on a granite wall are those pretty words he wrote, and they're bathed in light, the words that say all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And between Jefferson and that wall, there's another wall also shrouded in shadow made of brick. I don't think it's actually brick, it's probably paper mache made to look like a brick wall, but on every brick is a name, and if you don't know what the names represent, the docents will be glad to fill you in if you cannot figure it out on your own. On each brick is the name of a human being that Thomas Jefferson owned until his death, refusing even unto his death to relinquish his ownership over even one of them. And they contrast that wall with those pretty words, and you are reminded not only of the evil that existed for so long in this country, but the fact that even with the power and the majesty of someone as strong and as intelligent as Thomas Jefferson, that system was brought down. And you are reminded that with the committed effort, not hope, with the committed effort of abolitionists, Thomas Jefferson lost, slave owners lost, they are dead, and black and brown folks are still very much here. And then you continue to walk through the museum and you see the footage of George Wallace in 1963 standing in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama saying, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. But you are reminded that George Wallace is dead and black and brown folks are still very much here. And you continue to walk and you see the images of Bull Connor driving his tanks through black Birmingham and turning water cannons and dogs on black children in the summer of 1963. And then you see Jim Clark and his goons beating protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma in 1965. And you are reminded that Jim Clark is dead. All of his goons are dead. Bull Connor is dead. Black and brown folks still here, still fighting, refusing to give up on the quest for equity, inclusion, and justice. Just as we must remember that Mexican-American folk, who I beg to remind you were in the American Southwest long before European peoples came, because those Mexican-American folk imbibe indigeneity in part of their ancestry and culture. They were here first. It was their land. We kicked them off across a border, put them out of the house, changed the lock, and called that justice. But remember, they are still here trying simply to come home. And the indigenous of this continent want you to remember that they are still here. They are standing tall, whether is it at Standing Rock or anywhere else, and they want us to remember that they are not gone and we are not God. And so no matter what we have thrown at people year after year and generation after generation, commitment has always gotten us through. Commitment is how we have gotten from point A to point B. Not hope, but action. Not hope, but doing the work. And if you can look at that history and not find yourself in it, I don't know how to help you, but if you look at that history and you feel despondent, you need to look at that history again, because what that tells us is that even in our darkest moments as a culture, even in those moments when people figured there was no way out of systems of oppression, commitment has moved the ball from point A to point B over and over and over again. And who in the world are we not to take up that charge now? But what we have to do is to make sure that in that process, we hold one another, because there will be difficult times, and oftentimes we will not succeed, and we'll have to regroup. James Baldwin explained this better than I could in 1964 in an essay called Nothing Personal. I will tell you what Baldwin said, and then I will leave you be. Baldwin said this. He said, "One discovers the light in darkness. That is what darkness is for. But everything in our lives depends on how we bear the light. It is necessary while in darkness to know that there is a light somewhere, to know that in oneself waiting to be found there is a light. What the light reveals is danger, and what it demands is faith. I know we often lose, and how often one feels that one cannot start again, and yet on pain of death, one can never remain where one is. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light fails. Lovers cling to each other and children cling to us. And the moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out. So hold one another, be the light for one another, and keep the faith that this too and this moment in our history will pass." Thank you all so very much for being here. I appreciate you. Thank you.
I'm not usually lost for words, as they will tell you. Dr. Pinkett this morning helped us reflect on our why. You have just made it real clear on what to do about that why. There can be no healing or reconciliation without truth. You encourage us to do that. We cannot even begin to do this work if we don't know that the system is designed to do exactly, get the outcomes it is getting. Otherwise, we're just beating our heads against the wall. And if we don't have any commitment, then what is even the point? We honor you. We thank you. And I just want you all to just extend your hand to him, because, people like him back in the day were assassinated for saying what he said here today. So let's just extend our hands to him right now and just send love and virtue and power and wisdom and safety into his life. And on behalf of Washington State, I know you down there in Nashville, but there is nothing like the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And it is my pleasure to present you with your own, very own Tim license plate from Washington State. And the certificate of appreciation, which, and by the way, weren't the certificates beautiful today? Just as a point of clarity, let's just thank Teresa Powell and the DSHS crew for making this happen. Governor Inslee, Mariko Bartow, Patty Danner, our co-chairs, we just want to just extend to you our appreciation. Let's just thank Mr. Wise, Tim Wise again, for coming to share with us. And so with that, I think all that's left for me to say is, this is the beginning of a new day. You've been given this day to use as you will. You can waste it or use it for good. What you do today is important because you are exchanging a day of your life for it. When tomorrow comes, this day will be gone forever. In its place is something you have left behind. Let it be something good, because ain't no stopping us now. Johnson out.
So if you can give us just a few seconds of your time, we would like to actually take this opportunity to recognize Dr. Johnson. There we go. And as you all are aware, after these 2 days, she continues to inspire, support, push boundaries, move mountains, and seize the day. And if it wasn't for her, most of us wouldn't be up here and in this room. So thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you all. We appreciate you all. Take this, run with it, commit to it, and please be safe heading home. You want to recycle your lanyards? We got boxes downstairs on the 3rd floor. Feel free to, otherwise take them as souvenirs. Thank you all.